See, these are things that we have encountered in our relationship over the years. Understandably, there is a difference of opinion, and we have a joint working group that's very steadily but slowly moving forward. And I think over the years, various propositions have come from both sides of how this matter can ultimately be resolved. But I think it's understood that there isn't a sense of urgency that it must be resolved right away, knowing fully well that these are difficult issues. These are not issues that necessarily get resolved if you push them for a resolution in a very short space of time. I think you'll need to let a lot of things evolve around these issues, which is what has happened in the developing relationship between China and India. And so to take any specific thing in isolation and say, well, that means a very questionable, unacceptable act, and giving it disproportionate attention, I think doesn't help on either side. And this is how we've learned on both sides to deal with each other. So I think the caveat is that you can't give an impression that it's something that you don't accept and you cannot agree with. You will acquiesce in, and therefore tomorrow be told, well, you never raised any questions about this. But at the same time, to get alarmed and begin to raise the ante, I think is neither called for, not something that we do. There are not just this, many issues arise from time to time, and I think we are able to resolve them or able to bypass them so that the main thrust of our relationship with China continues to grow. It's an important relationship, I think, in this region and in the world, and I think it's mutually beneficial for both sides to allow this relationship to grow and to become wholesome. China is in transition as far as its leadership is concerned. We've had good signals from the emerging new leadership, and we want to build on those signals rather than to detract or to dilute the positive impact of those signals. So that's our position. There are issues that get resolved in due course. Nothing that today necessarily will stall what we believe is a mutually beneficial relationship.
But at the same time, there does seem to have been an escalation in the last few months, I guess, particularly in terms of confrontation between the Chinese and the Philippines and Vietnam in the South China Sea, and now, of course, with Japan. So this move, following on from those clashes, it seems there's a sense of growing pressure from China to actually get its way with some of these issues.
Well, that's one way of describing it, but I think as the world evolves and a lot of things are changing in the world, I mean, there is a growing demand for reform in the United Nations, for instance, the Security Council. We are at the forefront of that demand for reform, and also claim to be beneficiaries of that possible reform. There are regional realignments taking place, there are regional adjustments taking place, regional assertions taking place, many more barriers of the past breaking down with greater communication levels, people moving to and fro a lot more. And at the same time, there are hotspots in the world that we know are worrisome for everyone. And some of them can be not too far away from India. But again, even there, we do believe that there are some positive signals of movement in the right direction, some imponderables that obviously all stakeholders have to come together and find solutions to. And I think that's the attitude that people have taken towards some issues that concern many immediate stakeholders, but also a larger section of the world community, about navigation, freedom of navigation, and the law of the sea. And I think in that context, no communications have broken down. That's the important thing. Communications haven't broken down. There are, of course, positions that China has taken that others have not necessarily agreed with. China has also suggested a way in which it could be resolved bilaterally. Others think it may be better to resolve it multilaterally, etc. But I think let's wait and see how things move forward.
Are you able to give any details about how you as a government have responded to the Chinese move? I mean, we've read some reports that India is now stamping its own map on Chinese visas. Is that true? And has there been a...
Well, I would not, whatever China does, I wouldn't put it as necessarily something that's endorsed directly from the top. I mean, there are different levels that decisions can be taken that may not be necessarily against the Chinese interests, but may at the same time not necessarily have been a well thought out strategic, dipstick about getting a sense of how people would react. And I think that's probably true about India as well, that not everything goes right to the top. Important issues will go right to the top. If there are pronounced policy issues, then they would be considered right at the top and in the manner and through the methodology that we adopt. But so long as you are broadly consistent with the ideological positions or stated principles of your governance, I think strategically or tactically doing something at a particular time would necessarily be endorsed all the way to the top. I don't think is the way governments work. But at the end of the day, yes, some decisions would be taken, and those decisions may need to go right to the top, whether you're reviewing something that's happened, you're diluting it, delaying it, beginning to negotiate on it, beginning to communicate on it, that may go to the top. So I don't think we should rush into any judgment on this. As far as the US is concerned, they have their own evolving policies over the years. They have come up with different perceptions and different manner of engagement with China. And we study it and we take it on board and see where it can be integrated with positions that we take. But we like to have an independent position with every country, including with China. It may or may not necessarily at any given time match perceptions of any other country. We do believe that we have a great deal of substance of a direct relationship with China, and we'd like to keep it that way.
I mean, Japan is one country that has sort of felt the impact of falling out with China over these issues, with its exports to China of its cars and electronics having fallen pretty sharply because of the Chinese unwillingness to buy them. Is there a sense that India feels that China is willing to use its economic muscle in foreign policy, and that's something that India is concerned about because at the moment they can't match it?
Well, don't we all use our economic muscle? I mean, what is economic muscle for if you're not to use it to greater advantage of your people, so long as it's not illegitimate, so long it doesn't violate principles of international law, and so long as in terms of a general perception of the Committee of Nations, it is reasonable and enlightened self-interest. I think nobody can necessarily complain about it, and therefore we cannot ask any country to set its economic muscle or its economic persuasive powers apart. But if you're in the same marketplace and you're competing for space, then of course there will be a natural competition. India encourages competition. We have a very profound competition policy. We have a competition commission. We encourage competition. We believe competition is good for mankind and for humankind, and therefore we will not make exceptions for competition. We will have to prepare ourselves if there is competition. We will perhaps perform better if there is competition, but competition obviously must be fair competition, and that's what we urge in all multilateral fora, and what is in fact WTO about. So China is a member of WTO. We encouraged that decision to be taken, because China should not have remained in isolation. The world countries were putting together a regime that's to be for the benefit of everyone. And therefore, if there is something to be discussed and something to be worked on, there are these international fora available.
You mentioned earlier, in response to the first question, that you'd had some good signals from the new leadership. Are you able to give us some detail on that? I mean, there's this sense that I guess that as two large countries, growing economies, do develop, then perhaps there's an inevitable antagonism that will develop between these two countries, and managing that is obviously part of your job.
Well, yes.
But you're saying that you've received some signals from Beijing.
Well, what happens is when there are changes taking place in a country, you reach out to them and they reach out to you, and you signal to your neighbors, and you signal to your partners, and signal to the rest of the world that you intend to go in a particular direction, and that's done through bilaterals, messages that are conveyed at the highest level through bilaterals. Also important events within your own country where policy pronouncements are made, where statements are made which are supposed to cross borders and go to the rest of the world. And now, of course, we are living in a communication village, so anything that you say anywhere is communicated immediately. I think the meetings that took place in the East Asia Summit in ASEAN, I think those are meetings at which very clear signals of positive road ahead for India and China were given.
Have they suggested perhaps a speeding up of border discussions or something that is...
I don't have information about specifics, but I think that you talk of a chemistry and you speak of basic signals, and I think the sense of those basic signals and the chemistry has been good.
Moving on to a separate issue, which is the nuclear liability law,
Yeah.
which was passed last year. Now we know that's of concern to a lot of American companies, particularly who are looking to invest here after the deal. And I think you had discussions with last week or earlier this month with visiting State Department officials on this. Is there anything that the Americans can look forward to in terms of making it easier for them?
See, as you know, we are completely committed, and this was a landmark decision taken by the US government, and we believe a landmark success of the two governments being able to come together on something that previous generation would never have ever imagined could be possible. Now, as far as we are concerned, I think the legislation is in place. We've put the structures in place. We've also made efforts to ensure that the nuclear industry in the US has comfort on the basis of what we have done, and we've had exchanges that we've tried to communicate that. There are some related issues on which US and India have to work together, and we are working together. I think that when you take a landmark decision of this nature, there are a lot of follow-up steps that you need to take. And one of the follow-up steps that we need to take is to ensure that we carry conviction with US industry, and I think we've done a fair amount of work there. If there are any more caveats or questions that remain, we will address them as well as we go along.
So could you put a date on when you think you would see the first American company?
I'm sure I could, but I not offhand. I mean, it's obviously a big step. The first investment that will come will be a very big step, and therefore I wouldn't venture to suggest a date, but I hope that it happens soon. Every government looks at milestones and accomplishments that you can show within the period, the tenure that you're given to perform. And obviously, as we look ahead at 2014, that'll be the end of our tenure. We would want to be able to say that, look, substantial progress has been made as we had hoped would be made, and report back to the country that this is a success story.
But could that involve a watering down of the liability laws, or would it mean something like a waiver for US companies that were willing
No,
to
well,